search for patterns. When I look for certain files, I can just use the find command very fast in a directory. It's easier to do comparison between files based on the things like diff, all kinds of tools like that. And also, in some cases, I just want to access it from a very, for example, if I put it on a server, and let's say it's a bit of code or documentation or README file, I want to be able to just SSH without using X forwarding and just go into the file and just VI the file and change something in the file. It's extremely simple. Instead of just running a whole kind of, Microsoft Word to just change a few characters in a letter, it makes no sense unless you, and you can always, of course, go from one to the other. You can just add some format and you can open it and save it as a PDF if you prefer to do that. But there is this distance now for lots of people. They want to get themselves out of the way things used to be done, where you use typewriters, and that's all you could do. You could maybe just move things around, make more spaces, open a new line, but the characters were characters, and it was fixed size for all the characters, and it was fine. People could exchange letters and cables, and everything else just works fine.
This is probably going to be a subject for another show, because I think it's a very interesting topic that I've always wanted to cover for a long time and have a good discussion on it. But I think as years have progressed and computing and technology in general has become more user-friendly, I think the general user, the average user, if you will, has lost a lot of the skills. I certainly remember going back to the days of the Spectrum, where a lot of the time you would have to write programs yourself. There wasn't the facility to just go online and download an application to do X, Y, Z. And as a result of that, it meant that the end user wasn't so dependent on other people's solutions, because if you had a problem, you tended to solve it yourself. And I think now we live very much in a society where everybody expects it to be handed on a plate to them. And if it doesn't work, they're not interested, for the main user. Which is a shame.
It's a bit of an issue for developers as well, because you do tend to have the monoliths of the industry. Big companies offering these really, really big comprehensive packages, like a few gigabytes of binaries, offering just about anything, and you don't really have the custom, the custom-made type of programs being necessary for you to actually hire a programmer to do things for you, to make a small program work in a way which is useful to your business. And what it actually leads to is lots of people depend on the very, very few large companies to make these products. And lots of people don't get recognition and don't get many jobs as they used to. It's a bit like the malls versus the small shops. People prefer to go to the big shop because it might be cheaper. It might be kind of, you go there and you buy all your stuff, and you get things like your milk and your bread, and then you buy a television in the same place, which makes not much sense anyway. And the people who used to sell these things and specialize in these things and actually give you the TV that you need are not actually there. You just kind of look at the shelf and you see something on sale, but you don't necessarily get the best thing for you. So that there is this kind of demise of expertise and demise of kind of quality, or the demand of quality, and people actually doing their crafts and doing it very well. It's a lot of industrialized, generic solution to like as many people as possible. So you don't really get very many custom-made things which are very, very good for a specific solution, but you do get this kind of generic kind of I'm trying to think of an example, but you probably can think of things, even things like tables and things like wardrobes. In the past, people would actually build these things and actually specify how to build these things, and these days people just jump into a shop, and if the wardrobe doesn't actually fit the room properly, no big deal. It's not exactly, but it's kind of like it's an average, kind of okay for most people.
Well, you see that in the software world, especially. I mean, I hate harking back to the days of the Amiga, like I'm some sort of long in the tooth prehistoric computer user. But you look back to the days of the Amiga, where you had assembly language. People actually went out and learned assembly language because you wanted to do more advanced coding. You wanted to access the chipset, the graphic chipset, and produce some really good special effects. In those days, there was no SDKs or anything like that, which produced these sort of generic games that you see nowadays where you've got one game, for example, Halo, and then you'll have 7,000 other clones of it just with different graphics. Now, I'm not suggesting that Halo uses the same code as any other company's engine, but you've got these Unreal engines now, and and it's all sort of given to you on a plate, and you can produce your own software title very simply now, your own 3D game, your own first-person shooter, very simple, but it's all the same. There's no variation, and in the days of the Amiga, certainly that was when I saw real creativity, because people were just given a book, your hardware manual, right, learn assembly language, off you go, and there was no limits, you weren't restricted by whatever features of a particular game engine, and people went out and created. And arguably nowadays, with machines and the specs that we have and the plethora of graphics cards that we've got, etc., make the job a little bit more difficult. But I mean, the ethos is there, and the days of the Amiga were probably the golden days for me for computing, because that's where you saw the real ingenuity, the real creativity, and it was birthed to a lot of very talented coders nowadays. So yes, so rant over, Roy.
Yeah, well, in many ways. I'm always trying not to be too subjective from a generational point of view, but when you look back at the previous generations, or you look back at the comparison of the next generation, the younger people, you always think their generation I think kind of sucks in a way, that they don't have the things you used to have. And I'm not sure if that's a thing that's normal for each generation to have. But one of the things that I remember is that games were really, really evolving a lot as I grew up, because I grew up from the point where we had like 4 screens on the screen, playing things like snooker on the screen. And as you grow into like teenage years, you see things like Wolfenstein 3D, and then you see all this very nice kind of polygon-based games, everything kind of evolving. And I don't really feel as though we've moved so much in the past 10 years. We did move in terms of hardware, but you don't actually you don't actually extract the most you can get out of it.
And also from a technical standpoint, I mean, I have a long history with computing. I'm sure you do as well. But going back to my youth, and things like David Braben, he was the author of Elite. Now he managed to cram in a game which was effectively Grand Theft Auto in space, and he managed to cram that into about 32K of memory. Now that was where the real talent was. We didn't have gigs and gigs of memory. We didn't have hard disks, the size of a Terminator server. So, and that's why people had to be creative. People had to actually work for a living, if you don't take that offensively. But we got Elite in 32K. We had Elite 2 Frontier within, I think it was 1.4 meg. I mean, these things are unheard of these days. And just going back to a very quick point, nowadays, if you want to display say you're a Windows programmer and you want to display a 3D cube onto the screen and rotate it in 3 dimensions, you've got things like Dark Basic, which can do it with one command. Whereas in the day where I grew up on the Amiga, you had to actually code that from scratch yourself and had to actually understand the mathematics. And I think the problem with a lot of today's coders, not so much, and I wouldn't want to comment for the professional industry, but certainly for the bedroom coders, they can do something and make it work, but they don't understand how it works. And the mathematics behind rotating a cube in 3 dimensions is a lot different to just typing a single command on the screen. And I think that's where we're losing a lot of this skill. And as the years go on, we're not seeing as much variation in the games. Like you say, Roy.
There are arguments both ways. One, I happen to program in a very high-level language myself, most of the time if I can. I know about I did study about pointers in C, and I was programming with all of these issues. It takes up a lot of your time, and some would argue you spend a lot of time actually dealing with small things in your programs instead of actually carrying on and trying to do more advanced things. That's one of the reasons there is one famous professor who says you should not teach Java in colleges because the kids will never learn about the limitations and memory allocations and garbage collections. They just don't think about that. Even if you explain it to them, they will just be very, very lazy and just learn about Java as this is programming and this is it. And you don't have to think about what's around it. Java will just take care of it. Of course, now we have even more advanced things than that, and people can maybe concentrate on something else instead of thinking about more basic things. They can progress to thinking ahead or thinking higher. And maybe that's got some advantages too. So you can actually make very complex programs within like 10 hours. You can get
it's probably 6 and 2 3s, but I mean, I've always argued, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I've always argued that assembly language is the basis in which to understand other languages. It's a bit like learning Latin. If you learn Latin, and I put my hands up here, haven't learned Latin, I always keep intending to, but it shows you the structure of sentences, and allegedly, once you understand Latin, you can understand all languages very, very simply in the way they're constructed. And I think with assembly language, rightly or wrongly,